They gave me the command I had just told them not to accept. That is the fact of it. That is the whole shape of my life in one sentence, if you want it compressed that way. I had spoken for 2 hours. I had laid out the arithmetic, the distance, Sicily, nearly 1,000 miles of open water, a hostile island with no reliable allies, no fixed base of supply. I had named what we did not know, the size of the Syracusan forces, the loyalty of the Sicilian Greeks who were supposed to welcome us, the coast, which none of us had walked, none of us had sounded. I told them what an army costs per day, and what 3 years costs, and what happens when the money runs out, 1,000 miles from home and the corn does not come, and the men begin to wonder which general they will eat first. They voted anyway. They always vote anyway. I was 53 years old. My knees ached in the mornings from the old campaigns. My kidneys had been troubling me for 2 years, a dull grinding pain in my lower back that my physician called manageable, which is what physicians say when they mean they do not know how to cure it. I had won at Melos, at Pylos, at Cythera, at Minoa. I had negotiated the peace that bears my name, which held for 7 years and might have held longer if Alcibiades had not wanted to be famous. I was a man who had done his part. I was a man who had already bled for this city and been thanked for it in the way Athens thanks its generals, which is by finding new things to ask of them. I had my wax tablets in my hand when I sat down. I had written every argument on them, every number, every distance, every gap in what we knew. I looked at the wax. The letters were already beginning to soften in the afternoon heat of the Nix. Someone was cheering behind me. I thought about the face of my son, who was 11 years old and not yet old enough to understand where Sicily was or why it mattered. I thought about my wife, who had said nothing when I told her what I intended to argue. Not nothing from fear. Nothing, because she already knew what Athens would decide, and she was saving herself the cost of hope. They voted yes. And then they voted me general. I held the tablets in my hands for a long time after. You have never seen anything like it. 134 triremes, 27,000 men, soldiers and sailors, and the tradesmen and servants who follow an army, the way gulls follow a fishing boat. The harbour was so thick with hulls you could walk from one shore to the other without wetting your feet. The morning was clear. The Saronic Gulf was flat and silver. The city had come out in full, every family with a man aboard, every priest with every libation, the flute players and the generals and the boys who would grow up, some of them, to remember this day as the last good one. Lamachus was on my left. He was a soldier's soldier, scarred knuckles, a laugh that came from somewhere below his chest, the kind of man who is never afraid and therefore cannot understand men who are. He thought we would be home before the grain harvest. Alcibiades was on my right, beautiful, certain, already talking about Carthage. He was 35 and had never been wrong about anything in his own accounting. And I was in the middle, holding my wax tablets, reading my own arguments to myself. The triremes moved out in column. The crowd on the shore made a sound I have never been able to describe. Not quite a cheer. Something between a prayer and an exhalation, as if the whole city had been holding its breath for a year and only now let it go. I watched the water between the hull and the dock grow wider. I thought, we are going to lose this. I had no evidence, only the feeling a man gets when he has been right too many times about things no one wanted to hear. Syracuse did not fold like wet leather. We had been outside the walls for 8 months by the time Lamachus died. He went down in a skirmish near the Anapus River, an ordinary contact engagement, the kind of fight that kills ordinary men every day of a siege. A spear through the chest. He was dead before anyone could reach him. Alcibiades was gone by then. Athens had recalled him to face charges of sacrilege, the Herms, the mutilation of the road markers the night before departure. He sailed back as ordered, then slipped overboard somewhere near Thurii and defected to Sparta. Sent them a general named Gylippus. Sent them, in other words, the instrument of our destruction, gift-wrapped and delivered by a man who had once been our most brilliant citizen. So I was alone. I was sick. The kidney pain had become something I could no longer call manageable. There were mornings I could not stand without holding the tent pole, waiting for the first wave to pass. I wrote to Athens. I told them the truth, which is something generals rarely do, and something no city wishes to hear. I told them we were not winning. I told them to either send reinforcements or allow me to bring the fleet home. They sent Demosthenes. I was grateful and I was afraid, and both feelings were exactly right. The relief fleet arrived in the summer of 413 BC. 73 more triremes, 5,000 more hoplites. Demosthenes looked at the situation for 2 days and said we needed to take the high ground at Epipolae, the plateau above Syracuse, and we needed to take it immediately, before the Syracusans could reinforce their positions there. He was correct. I knew he was correct, and still something in me hesitated. We attacked at night, 10,000 men, moving in silence over unfamiliar ground in darkness, in summer, with the moon not yet risen. For the first hour, we were winning. The Boeotian contingent of the Syracusan allies broke our advance. They held, and then the Syracusans began shouting the paean, the battle cry, the same one our men used, the same words, the same pitch, and in the darkness our men could not tell which voices were theirs and which were ours. The particular horror of a battle where you cannot identify your enemy by sound, where the words that mean we are safe and the words that mean we are dying are the same words. The retreat became a rout. Men fell off the cliff faces in the dark. Men were killed by their own comrades. Men ran and could not find the path and stood still and were cut down where they stood. When the sun came up, the plateau was covered with Athenian dead. I counted what remained. I did not write the number down. I have not spoken it aloud since. It lives in me like the kidney pain, dull and grinding and mine alone. Demosthenes said we should leave. He said it the morning after Epipoli, and he said it again 3 days later, and he said it again when the Syracusan fleet blocked the harbour mouth and our triremes could no longer get supplies in or men out. He said, "Nicias, we have lost." I told him we could not go. I truly believed, that Athens would punish us more harshly for leaving without orders than for losing with them. I had seen what Athens did to generals who failed. I had watched it. I had been on the juries, some of them, in the years when I still believed that was how justice worked. And there was something else. Something I could not say to Demosthenes without it sounding like what it was. I was afraid to go home. Not afraid of the sea. Not afraid of the Syracusans behind us. Afraid of the dock at Piraeus, the face of my wife, the way the city would look at me. I had told them not to go. They had gone anyway. And now I had to bring back the proof of everything I had warned them about, carry it home on my back like a stone, lay it at the feet of the men who had overruled me and watch them look for someone to blame. I gave the order to fight. The harbour battle lasted 1 day. We lost. 40,000 men, or what remained of them, moving south through the Sicilian interior. The heat was September heat, which in Sicily means a weight in the air that presses down on everything. We had no food except what men carried on their bodies and what they could find in the fields we passed through, which was nothing because the Syracusan cavalry had been through before us. The water was bad. By the 3rd day, men were drinking from ditches. The cavalry pressed us on both flanks. I walked. My legs still worked, though the kidney pain had climbed into my chest by then, and I was not sure anymore whether it was disease or grief, or whether the two had become the same thing. The men looked at me, not with hatred, something worse than hatred. The look of men who needed to believe in something and had discovered there was nothing left to believe in, and were now asking me, quietly, with their eyes, to pretend otherwise. I walked through them saying the things a general says. A few more miles. The river is ahead. Once we reach the river, we can rest. I did not believe it. I do not know if they believed it, but we kept walking. The river, the Asinaris. We reached it on the 6th day, or I think it was the 6th, the days having lost their edges by then. I remember the sound of it before I could see it, the sound of water moving over stones. The column changed character, the way a formation changes when the enemy line breaks. The order collapsed, not from panic but from thirst, from 50 hours of sun and dust and nothing to drink. The men at the front ran into the water, and the men behind them ran into the men ahead, and the whole army stopped being an army and became a crowd of men standing in a river drinking with their faces in the water. The Syracusans were on the far bank. They had been waiting. They came down both sides. I will not describe what happened in the Asinaris in detail. Some things should not be described in detail. I will say that the river was shallow and wide, and there was nowhere to go, and the men who had walked 6 days through the Sicilian heat died in the water they had walked 6 days to reach. I walked toward the Syracusan line, not to fight. I surrendered. I said to the General Gylippus, a Spartan, Alcibiades' gift, I said, "Whatever you are going to do to me, do it. But spare the men, whatever is left of them. Let them live." He looked at me for a moment. He said he would try. He was a soldier. I believe he meant it. They put the survivors in the stone quarries. The Latomiae, 40 feet deep, open to the sky. No shade, no shelter. September sun and then autumn rain and then cold. They gave the men half a pint of water per day, a cup of grain. 8,000 men, more or less, in a space meant for stone and nothing else. I did not go into the quarry. They separated me and Demosthenes from the others. Gylippus argued for our lives. He said we should be taken to Sparta, kept as proof of the victory, useful. He said killing us was the act of men who were not confident in their own justice. The Syracusans voted to execute us anyway. They were tired of the war and afraid of what Athens might do if it knew we were alive. I do not know what Demosthenes said before they killed him. He died first. I was told it was quick. I thought about the assembly. The Nix, the afternoon light on the stone seats, the smell of the crowd, 400 men sitting in the heat, arguing about whether to sail to a place most of them had never seen. I thought about my wax tablets. The arguments I had written down in careful order, each one numbered, each one with its evidence. The distance, the cost per day, the gaps in what we knew. The letters were still soft from the heat when they voted. I had held them in my hands for a long time after. I do not know what I was waiting for. He was not there. Thucydides was in exile at the time, banished from Athens 14 years earlier for a failure of his own, a campaign he had arrived too late to save. He wrote his history from the accounts of others, from documents, from the kind of reconstruction that a careful man builds when he wants to know what happened and knows he will never know completely. He wrote that I was the least deserving of any Greek of his time of such a fate. He wrote that I had lived my whole life in the practice of virtue. I do not know what to do with that sentence, whether it is praise or an indictment, whether a man can be virtuous and still lose a war, whether the practice of virtue is worth anything at all if it ends here, in a quarry in Sicily, in a city I had argued against visiting. Perhaps Thucydides was not interested in whether virtue is rewarded. Perhaps he only wanted to say that I was a man, a complete man with flaws and failures, who had done what he believed was right and been destroyed for it. Not destroyed because of his flaws, destroyed because history is indifferent to the difference. That is not comfort, but it is honest. The last thing I held was not a weapon. I had put down the tablet somewhere on the march. I cannot remember exactly where, one of the last days, when the pain had become large enough that I stopped tracking things that were not the next step, the next mile, the next morning. It was probably in a ditch somewhere south of Syracuse. Wax and wood, dissolving in the Sicilian mud, my arguments returning to the earth in the order I had written them. What I held at the end was nothing, my hands empty. This is the part I could not have written in the assembly, could not have put on any tablet, could not have made an argument out of. That a man can be careful and diligent and correct in everything he recommends and still end up here, hands empty in a place he never wanted to go. Athens did not deserve the men it destroyed, but it destroyed them anyway. That is the city. That was always the city. The water was still warm when they brought me to it. I thought about the harbour at Piraeus, the morning we left, the sound the crowd made when the fleet moved out. Not quite a cheer, something between a prayer and an exhalation. The sound of a city letting go.